Hi, welcome to True Creeps, where the stories are true and the creeps are real. We'll cover stories from grotesque gore to the possibly plausible paranormal, to horrifying history, to tense and terrible true crime, and everything else that goes bump in the night. We're your hosts, Amanda.
And I'm Lindsay, and we want you to join us while we creep.
We cover mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey, everybody. So today, originally, we were going to talk about a few different cases and instances that inspired X-Files episodes. But when we started learning about the Gloria Ramirez case, we were so fascinated that we decided to do an entire episode about it. So if you haven't watched X-Files, you don't need to, because we're really just talking about the inspiration behind episode 24, the Erlenmeyer flask, which is an interesting and sad case. We also covered other X-Files related things like Tulpas, we love them, Jersey Devil, and the Bermuda Triangle.
Say it right.
Jersey Devil. I thought I did.
Thank you. You needed more emphasis.
Yeah. And speaking of Jersey Devil, we do have a new t-shirt out that we are a little bit obsessed with that talks about milking cryptids. And it does have a Jersey Devil on it.
It's perfect.
It is my favorite ever. It is my favorite design that I've made for True Creeps ever. I was like, this is chef's kiss. With the help of Canva, obviously, you know?
Right, of course.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about Gloria Ramirez's story today.
Yeah, and this was a recommendation, I believe, yeah?
Yes, this was a recommendation from my bestie, Damien. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. I feel like I had heard of this case before, but I hadn't read too much about it. I want to say I was watching like a medical mysteries episode on whatever network used to do all those like late night medical things forever ago.
Yeah, I know vaguely about what you're talking about, but I cannot remember the name of the show.
No, that was just like what you'd put on before you went to sleep, and it was horrifying. I don't know why I did that to myself, but this case is interesting on so many levels and just incredibly sad.
Yeah.
And just to note, too, this is one of the most forensic medical investigations. So there's a lot to look at as far as her, what was going on, what was happening at the hospital at the time, just so many things to investigate.
Yeah.
So again, like Lindsay just said, let's talk about Gloria first. So she was born on January 11th, 1963 in Riverside, California, and she did live there most of her life. Gloria had a 9-year-old son named Angel Arciniega Jr. and a 12-year-old daughter named Evelyn Arciniega, and that was from a previous marriage. So Reverend Brian Taylor talked about Gloria, and he said that she was a friend to all, quick to smile, and a carefree joker,
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of funny. And she brought comfort and joy to others, so she seemed like a selfless person. Gloria was buried on April 21st of 1994 and died at the age of only 31 years old.
That's so young.
It is, especially when we talk about people and I'm like, they were younger than us. Like they didn't even get to experience much.
Yeah.
Amazing Grace was her favorite song, and she would often hum it around the house. So people remembered that about her, which I thought was sweet.
Yeah.
Like when there's a song that reminds you of someone, and then when you hear it, I don't know. It made me a little sad.
But it's also kind of like, it's bittersweet, right? Because that means that every time you hear that song, you'll be like, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to say they were like, oh, I remember her humming it like in her kitchen or something. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that would be a memory that would stick around.
Yeah.
Freddie Ochoa, which was her brother, released 3 balloons to symbolize her freedom. So that was after she had passed. Gloria's sister Maggie said, quote, "It was traumatizing to see my sister laying there, not knowing the cause of her death, and seeing the speculation that she was the cause of these fumes, as if she was a monster. In reality, she was a very loving person, so full of life and willing to give." And at her funeral, Maggie read a poem written by Evelyn, which was Gloria's daughter. And it said, "Roses are red, violets are blue. The next time I find a red rose, it'll be just for you. When the stars shine, it will remind me of you."
Oh, that's so sweet. I can't even imagine. Losing your mother is not good at any age, but being like a preteen girl.
Yeah, that's when you need her the most.
Yeah. And so my heart just hurts for her and her brother, Angel. So let's talk a bit about what happened. Devastatingly, Gloria had cervical cancer, and she had been undergoing treatment for about 6 weeks. And it began at the end of 1993, which would have been just a couple of weeks before her 31st birthday. And she learned after her diagnosis that she had advanced cervical cancer. But per her sister, Maggie, they had told her that it wasn't going to be fatal. So while it was horrifying that she had cancer, they thought she was going to live. Like, this wasn't supposed to be something that ended her life so young. And she just started chemo. Now, at the time of her death, Gloria may have been unemployed, and some reports say that she may not have had health insurance, which meant that this was extra difficult for her because, even for a person with the best insurance in the United States, cancer treatments are expensive. Any type of treatment is expensive, but especially if you're paying out of pocket for it. And we didn't see this in a ton of reputable sources, so there's not a ton on her financial background, which is fair. But it's hard to think that this wouldn't be a factor in the way that she may have been treated when she got there.
Exactly, exactly. Situations like this always make me very sad and angry. Not necessarily in Gloria's specific case, but the amount of people that go bankrupt or have insane financial hardships over just being sick.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's disgusting in our country that's a big fear.
Yes.
Especially as people get older. It was like, if I get sick, I'm going to ruin my family financially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so sad to think. Everyone should have the right to live and not have to worry that they're going to ruin their family if they get sick.
Absolutely.
And then on social media lately, too, just the amount of GoFundMes that I see on a weekly basis to help someone's kid get treatment. It doesn't matter who it is, but for me, especially when it's a little kid where you're like, you shouldn't be sick, you shouldn't be hurting. And the family having to reach out to strangers to get help because our country won't do it.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that just pisses me off more than anything.
Agreed. It's the idea that there's an entire industry that is designed to make people money, although it's supposed to be for our health, right?
Right.
You pay your premiums and they're like, well, but fuck you. I know that you're paying for this. I know that this is the service that you think you're getting, but we just don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah. They're just going to deny everything immediately.
And also just generally, if you've ever been to an emergency room when you were uninsured, you have absolutely felt this because unless you are unconscious, they are going to ask you, how are you going to pay today? That is the first question, right? It's one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, how are you going to pay for this? And it's like, maybe you deal with the broken bone first. Maybe you deal with the fact that this person just got into a car accident. Maybe you deal with a whole bunch of other things before you worry about that.
So fucking stupid. I hate this place. Anyways.
It's fucking wild. It's fucking wild. But all that to say is that we don't know whether this impacted anything. And from what we see, it doesn't seem as though her care was substantially different from somebody else's would have been. But it is a factor just to keep in mind.
Yes, yes.
So on February 19th of 1994, Gloria told her boyfriend, Johnny Estrada, that she was having trouble breathing. So he called for an ambulance. She had been also throwing up all throughout the day. Some reports also say that Gloria had a rapid heartbeat and a drop in blood pressure. When he called 911, he said whatever was wrong with her seemed to be escalating, and he asked for them to bring an ambulance. During the ambulance ride, she was placed on a monitor, administered oxygen, and then they started an IV, which I can't even imagine getting an IV in an ambulance.
They're very good at what they do.
They are. And frankly, first responders like EMTs, they do not make enough money.
No, they don't.
They should be paid so much more for what they do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think also just remembering that they started an IV in the ambulance ride, that was a big takeaway for me as we continue.
Yes.
So by the time Gloria got to Riverside General Hospital, she could barely answer questions. She had a rapid heartbeat and her blood pressure was continuing to drop. Hospital staff administered the standard protocol for Gloria's symptoms. From what we saw, it was Valium, Versed, hopefully I'm saying it right, Ativan, which was used for sedation. And then they gave her medicine to lower her heart rate, which was lidocaine and bretylium. Some sources say that when she got to the hospital, she also vomited. So they also tried using an ambu bag to force air into Gloria's lungs. And this is a bag, mask combo, that is similar to mouth, but much more sanitary.
Interesting. I'd never heard of that before, but I'm glad that exists.
Yeah. Unfortunately, nothing was working. We also saw that they may have tried to sedate Gloria at one point using diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam. Again, they didn't specify every single thing. This is just some of the things that we've seen.
Yes.
But like everything else so far, it seemed like she responded poorly to the sedatives, and things were just continuing to escalate pretty quickly. She then went into cardiac arrest. When they removed her shirt to use the defibrillator, some medical staff recalled seeing an oily sheen on her skin. Some also said that her breath was both garlicky and fruity.
I cannot imagine what that smell would be. Like, I can imagine those separately, but like a sweet kind of garlic. That sounds, my brain can't conceptualize it.
Yeah, no, that's very strange. And it would stick out, though. You'd remember it.
Mm-hmm.
A nurse named Susan Kane noticed a chemical smell when she drew Gloria's blood, which again, that would stick out, right? You're like, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Susan passed a syringe to a respiratory therapist that was assisting, and her name was Maureen Welch. Susan then leaned over Gloria to see if she could find another reason for the ammonia smell.
Because I could see if she was like, maybe I'm smelling something on her clothing. Maybe she's like got like something in her pocket that spilled.
Exactly.
I could see being like, let me inspect and see what's going on because surely it's not her blood.
Exactly.
Very fair. So when she passed it over to Maureen Welch, Welch then handed it to a third-year resident named Dr. Julie Gorchinsky. And Dr. Gorchinsky looked at the syringe with the blood in it and noticed that there were particles inside that were manila colored. Strange.
Yeah.
Then Dr. Huberto Ochoa, the doctor in charge of Gloria's care, looked at it and he also saw the particles. Now, when Susan went to leave the room, she started to faint. So she's beginning to faint. So they grab a gurney and they put her on it. And as she's going onto the gurney, she's like, my face is burning. Then Dr. Dorchinsky said she started to feel queasy and lightheaded, and then she passed out. And over the course of like the next little bit, she would start shaking intermittently and then would stop breathing for a few seconds, then regain her breath.
That would have been a very scary sight when you're like, people are there to get help, and then the help is just having issues too.
Yeah, like the doctors are going down. I cannot imagine how scary that would be.
Yeah.
So then Maureen passes out. Maureen would later recall hearing someone scream, and then the next thing she remembered was waking up. And when she did wake up, she couldn't feel her limbs.
Terrifying.
Right? So other members of the medical staff began to feel weak but didn't faint. And other people smelled the ammonia smell, but not everyone did. Dr. Ochoa decided to evacuate the emergency room. So everyone left except the few staff members who were trying to save Gloria. So they tried to administer electric shocks and drugs, but nothing works. One of the nurses who had stayed to help, Sally Balderas, began vomiting, and she said that her skin was burning as well. Sadly, Gloria died at 8:50 p.m. As an interesting note, the hospital is very specific that there were people who stayed to help Gloria, that it's not as though everyone panicked and just left her in there by herself, because I think that was one of the original concerns, was that everyone was so worried about what was happening that they stopped caring for her. But per Dr. Ochoa, that was not the case.
Yeah. And I mean, for every medical professional that I know personally, I feel like they would do the same, right? Like they would be like, no, we're going to help the patient, even if it is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. I would also point out that like people working in an ER are not easily shaken.
That's true.
They've seen very traumatic events where people are getting like coming in from car accidents and other very scary situations. So I don't think that they would be squeamish, or be like, oh my God, I gotta leave, right? An average non-medical person might be like, oh no, there's danger, versus someone who's like, no, I've trained for this. I've trained to stay calm.
Well, not only that, but a lot of the time in the medical field, they would be so curious as to what's going on too. Like medically, they'd be like, I need to understand this.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably, I'm no medical professional, but I feel like that would be me too, as far as like, no, I need to know the reason for this.
If you're a person who works in the medical field, you likely give a fuck about people. And knowing that not everybody can smell it, but some people are having reactions, I would be really reticent to leave, because I'd be like, but what if I'm a person who could be okay and could help?
Yes, that's true. So after Gloria passed, her body was put in a separate room and it was sealed in a casket. 23 of the 37 people who were working in the ER experienced symptoms. 5 were hospitalized for the night, and Sally, who was one of the nurses, was hospitalized for 10 days because she had irregular breathing. She couldn't return to work for months, and she ended up suffering from abdominal pains and headaches. Dr. Dorchinsky spent about 2 weeks in intensive care, and then when she woke up after she had fainted, she had muscle spasms, shortness of breath, a headache, numbness in her extremities, hepatitis, pancreatitis, and she also had aseptic necrosis. This is a super rare condition that basically attacked the bones in her knees. Whew. Scary. She underwent surgery and spent months on crutches, which is horrible. Crutches are the worst. Her doctors were adamant that this condition was caused by being exposed to toxins. She ended up suing the hospital and the coroner because she and her attorney believed that they were withholding information that was integral for her recovery. Which I can't imagine how scary that situation is where you're like, no, there's a reason and you're not telling me.
Because there's diseases that just happen and it's awful, and it could be environmental contaminants or it could be just shitty luck. But from everything we saw, this wasn't a thing where you just got it from shitty luck. It's that there was a cause, and it would make sense that this event that affected lots of people might be it.
Right, right. Now, a hazmat team searched the ER to see if they could find any signs of poison, gas, toxins, or any abnormal substances. Once they concluded that there wasn't anything out of the ordinary, they put her body into 2 plastic bags and then in an airtight steel container.
So the investigation into Gloria's death and what happened with the hospital would ultimately involve 10 local, federal, and state agencies assisting to try to figure out just what happened. They also searched Gloria's home, but they didn't find anything that was relevant. The county's hazardous materials squad provided protective suits for the first autopsy. And that first autopsy was 6 days after Gloria's death. The autopsy was conducted in a cubicle that was airtight, and it took about an hour and a half, during which they took blood and tissue samples from Gloria's body, and they also took a sample of the air that was in the body bag.
That's smart.
I think that some of the things that they tested here are particularly interesting because I would have never even thought about it. We'll get to more of that in a second. But throughout the research that they conducted, they found that she had Tylenol, lidocaine, codeine, and Tegan in her system, and the last one was a nausea medication. But apparently that medication works by breaking down amines in the body, which are related to ammonia, and some think that that's why her body smelled like ammonia, but that wasn't really a definitive cause.
That's interesting, though.
And if it was, they wouldn't have continued to search, right? If they could find something that was absolute.
Right, for sure.
So the coroner was getting, not surprisingly, a lot of pressure, and they decided to ask for help from other labs. One of the labs they worked with was the Forensic Science Center at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. This is also, by the way, just a fascinating laboratory. If you ever want to hear about kind of a science who's who, definitely take a look at that. But again, they did testing on some of the samples. And in addition to the normal kind of testing, they also tested what they called the headspace in the containers. And this is basically the air above it. So they weren't just testing the blood in a given petri dish, what have you. They were testing the air around it and how it was affected by whatever was in there. And what they had done was they would heat the samples that they used to room temperatures, and then they would see if vapors were emitted, which would make sense because you wouldn't see it if her body was cold, but at, a living temperature, it might react differently.
Yeah, and so they were thorough, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they were incredibly thorough, but they didn't find anything here. In an interview with the lab's director, Brian Andreessen, he said that he remembered thinking to himself, how could I spend so much time and not find anything? It plagued him. He really wanted to find an answer. And we'll talk more about this lab later on. But a little over a month later, there was a second autopsy, and this was on March 25th. They found a bizarre amount of dimethylsulfone in Gloria's body. And this is a naturally occurring substance in the human body, but it disappears in just about 3 days. However, there was 6 times the normal amount in Gloria's body 6 weeks after her death. So she obviously had an excess of it. Gloria's cause of death was ultimately listed as heart failure due to kidney failure from her cervical cancer, which is bizarre because her cancer was not supposed to be fatal.
Exactly.
And when you think of if your body can't pull out toxins, horrible things can happen. So it's not that this couldn't happen. It's just strange that it did when they said it wouldn't be fatal. And you would think that there would have been signs earlier on that something was wrong.
Right.
So the coroner also announced that they could not find any evidence of external substances that have caused or contributed to Gloria's death, with kind of an asterisk there that was also, or any of the symptoms that anyone in the hospital experienced. Because what they're doing is they're investigating Gloria's death, but the italicized portion under that is, and also what the fuck happened in that hospital. Because clearly there's 2 things. There's Gloria's death, which may or may not be related to what happened to the other people. And then there's what's happened to all of the medical staff.
Right, right. And could you imagine all of the families too? I mean, Gloria's family and then all of the medical professionals, what the fuck is happening? And waiting, this is the second autopsy and they're like, we still don't know anything as to why any of this happened. That'd be very frustrating.
Exactly.
After Gloria's body was released by court order, Gloria's family paid for a third autopsy. There were conflicting statements about her cause of death. Officials insisted that she died of natural causes and did not have any reason for the odor or the fainting. Gloria's family had a funeral and they buried her on April 21st. Now, just to note, county officials took 2 months to release her body for the funeral because of the toxicity levels, and they feared that people may faint or pass out. There was an article in the Los Angeles Times about the release of her body, and in the article, Dr. Bradley Gilbert, the Riverside County public health officer, said that scientific and medical experts have concluded that the body does, quote, not currently present a public health hazard and can be handled by the mortuary in preparation for the burial. And thinking about it from her family's perspective too, like waiting on her body and then them saying, oh, well, she could be toxic, so no. I know that it's all about safety, but also for her poor family just being like, she's my family member. She's not like this toxic material thing.
Yeah.
You know, I know that they didn't mean it in that fashion, but it's still like, I feel like it must have hurt.
Right? I don't think Gloria has any fault in this whatsoever, even a little bit at all. But at the time, they were so worried about what was going on in the hospital that they weren't really thinking, this is someone's death. People are grieving.
Yes, this is a family member.
Yeah, like this is an actual fucking person.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it doesn't seem that way. But again, I don't think it was anyone being a horrible person. It was just everyone's trying to be very careful. But on the other end of it, it seems really shitty.
Yeah.
So the county health department reached out to the California Department of Health and Human Services to help figure out what the hospital staff had experienced. The leading investigators were Dr. Ana Maria Osorio and Dr. Kristen Waller. They began with having most of the hospital staff answer a standardized questionnaire, which, like, okay, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty early on, Dr. Waller and Dr. Osorio realized that people who had worked within 2 feet of Gloria or had dealt with her IV had experienced the most intense symptoms. They also found that more women than men experienced symptoms, which I think was interesting. And then the other thing that they noticed is that a lot of the people who skipped dinner that night had the more severe symptoms.
Interesting. I'd also just point out that, like, we're talking 1993. Obviously, there are women doctors at that point, but I would say that I would be shocked if there were more men as nurses and support staff in the hospital than men as doctors. And then alternatively, the opposite for women, that if there weren't more women as support staff and nurses that were coming in versus being doctors. Do you see what I'm saying? That, like, it's even still, it's like more likely to see women as nurses and support staff in a hospital. So I'm like, okay, did they also just, by the natural progression of what happens in a hospital, did more women interact with her?
Likely. And yeah, I mean, as far as nurses go, they do a lot of
Yes.
stuff. Like, they do the majority of it. And the doctors are just like, yep, you're right.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, they have, I think, the harder job most of the time.
Nurses are fucking rock stars. Amazing.
Yes, yes. So they really didn't think that it was related to the fumes, only because of the information that they got from, like, the surveys and everything.
Mm-hmm.
On September 2nd, they released their findings. So what they found is that there was a mass sociogenic illness that may have begun from the unexplained smell.
Okay. You're telling me medical professionals got a little scared?
Seems weird.
That's your finding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they all passed out and stopped breathing and all these other things.
One person's knee began to, like, attack its bones because they thought they smelled something funny.
I mean, I hate bad smells, but that's a little dramatic.
I am very sensitive to smells, but I can guarantee you that I wouldn't pass out and start vomiting and have, like, my face burn and not be able to feel my extremities for weeks. Like, that feels a little at odds with these things.
Yes. Yes, especially for medical professionals.
Yes.
I wouldn't think that anyone would do this, but, like, medical professionals see and do
Yes.
so many strange things all the time that, like, it's hard to honestly scare them, I would think.
They're used to an array of smells. And the worst one that they've probably dealt with was probably not ammonia.
Yes, that too. So Dr. Osorio and Dr. Waller believed this because women are more likely to suffer from hysteria than men.
Kindly get fucked. I also very much feel like they picked 2 women doctors so that they could say this without it being sexist. And I'm like, nope, it's still sexist if you're a woman.
Well, also, and it's wrong. Like, it's just wrong.
It's wrong. Like, it doesn't, It defies all logic.
It really does. And the amount of things that women can do that are insane, and they're just like, no, they're hysterical.
Yeah, they smelled something funny, and now they're having their body attack its own bones. It just doesn't make any fucking sense.
Right. So then they pointed out that no poisons nor toxic substances were found. And the doctors also pointed out that there were 2 paramedics who had started an IV and had been in close proximity to Gloria that did not experience symptoms. And that's why earlier when I was like, she was in an ambulance, they went through her skin to start that IV and everything seemed normal to them.
Yeah.
Right? They were fine. They dropped her off. Everything was fine. And then it got weird.
Yeah, that is bizarre.
Now, if you're angry now, keep in mind that doctors even said that 3 emergency room workers were not even interviewed. And this may have been because there was a pending litigation, but still, like, you want all of the information, and they're like, can't do it with these 3.
It also feels like it conveniently omits the most serious and severe instances that could not be attributed to hysteria or a mass sociogenic illness.
Right.
It omits those from the sample, so they could not come up with a conclusion that is accurate.
They also said that they had not seen raw data from Gloria's autopsy, or I guess all 3 of them. Dr. Gerald Davison, a clinical psychology professor at UCLA, said, quote, "It's like saying the devil did it when you have no other explanation. They have made a diagnosis by excluding as much as possible and then jumping to the assumption that the cause of these illnesses was sociogenic."
Exactly. Literally exactly.
So at least someone had a brain there.
Yeah. So Amanda mentioned the lawsuits a moment ago. We also talked about Dr. Drakinski's earlier. But when this report came out, not surprisingly, Dr. Drakinski was pissed. That lawsuit that they had was for $6 million in damages. And Dr. Drakinski told reporters, "It's just not right. I think it is absurd and ridiculous for a government agency to come out with conclusions without reviewing all of the records. The bones in both my knees are dead, and they never even bothered to interview me." Ugh.
That's so frustrating.
Yeah. And then Dr. Drakinski's attorney, Russell Kussman, said, "Clearly, people were poisoned by something that night. This report may be based on politics or ignorance, but it's not based on science. These are all professional emergency room workers. They don't become hysterical because of a heart attack," which is what Gloria died of. Like, she had a heart attack that was caused by kidney failure, that was caused by her cervical cancer. So 2 other emergency room workers and Gloria's family sued the hospital. And Gloria's family, part of that suit was because they said that in her 1991 pap smear, there was evidence of cancer, and they didn't tell Gloria then, which is so heartbreaking.
That's terrifying, honestly.
Yes. And we couldn't find the outcome of any of these lawsuits, which was also very bizarre, which we did a lot of research and could not find how they ended. I would assume that they ended probably in settlements if there's not a ton more about them.
Probably.
So we mentioned the respiratory therapist that was in the room earlier, Maureen Welch, and Maureen was not pleased by this report because she knew, as a person who was in the room watching all of this happen, that it was not just hysteria. So she reached back out to that lab that we talked about earlier, and after some convincing, they decided to look at the case again. It's also worth noting that she had accumulated this massive binder of information, and she was like, "No, look at everything. There is an answer here that is not, y'all are dramatic. There's something going on." And she really pressured them, and they were like, "Okay." And that was partially because they were like, "Look at what she's created."
Well, also, that's demeaning to be like, you were hysteric. That's why everything happened to you. And she's like, "No, I'm a fucking professional, and something was weird or off."
Imagine that you are one of these medical professionals, right? And take the lawsuit portion out of it. You are a medical professional, and the hospital that you worked at and the county and government agencies and everybody is like, "You're just so dramatic that you faked these things." Do you think you're going to have an easy time finding another job? Probably not.
Well, finding another job or getting things covered.
Yeah. And that's also a difference between your insurance and workman's comp. And if they're fighting about it back and forth, then no one's paying. I hate it.
Right. And that's just our thoughts on it. We don't see any of that. But still, that would be very strange.
Yeah. So the assistant deputy director, Pat Grant, found a possible cause when he went through this massive file and did some more testing. So he thought that Gloria may have used DMSO cream to help relieve the pain she was experiencing from her cancer. And he had actually used that DMSO cream himself when he was an athlete, when he was in college. So he was familiar with it. And what really made him think about it was that garlicky smell that we had talked about earlier.
Smart.
And what DMSO cream is it's dimethyl sulfoxide. And doctors in the 1960s used it as a cure-all until a study showed that it could cause blindness in mice, and then it was considered a toxic substance. Then, in the 1980s, the ban was lifted and research on its medicinal efficacy continued.
It's interesting. I know we did like an old-timey medical episode a while back, like knowing the weird shit that was in medicine.
Yeah.
And they're like, actually, no, not anymore. That's something hardcore. You can't use that.
Yeah.
So just interesting that this happened so recently. If you add 1 oxygen atom to DSMO cream, you get dimethyl sulfone. If you add 2 oxygen atoms, you get dimethyl sulfate. So the researchers began to look into the effects of dimethyl sulfate. When the vapors of this get in the body, they can cause a whole host of symptoms, including paralysis, coma, delirium, and convulsions, and even organ damage, like to the kidney, heart, and liver. It could also be fatal. And as an interesting note, of the 20 types of symptoms reported by the staff that night, only 1, nausea and vomiting, is not a symptom of dimethyl sulfate exposure. I feel like that's kind of like, this is pretty spot on.
Something's up. This is on pure thoughts alone. But I think that when your body is exposed to toxins, it does sometimes vomit it because it doesn't make you vomit because it doesn't know where it's coming from. So it's like, could be in here, empty everything.
It purges, yeah. So chemists at the lab, Jeffrey Haas and Richard Whipple, reviewed thousands of papers written about the compounds. One of the papers was from 1987, and it was a classified document from the Department of Defense titled Reference Book on Chemical Warfare Information.
Wasn't quite sure how they got that, though, but I'm intrigued that they found it.
They must have, you know how they keep doing all these like purges of like, oh, these were classified and now these aren't? Maybe.
But like not in the early 90s.
I don't know. He knew someone that knew someone, maybe.
Yeah.
So this document said that if a half gram of dimethyl sulfate was dispersed in a cubic meter, it could kill a person in 10 minutes. It had also been tested as nerve gas, but it was never used for that. This would explain the smell on her skin and mouth and the reactions from the medical staff. The lab conducted testing and concluded that the dimethyl sulfone would form crystals when warmed in the body, and that when the blood was drawn at the hospital, the toxic vapor could have been vaporized out of the blood in the syringe.
And the reason why you're having that chemical reaction is because the dimethyl sulfone is being exposed to oxygen when it comes out of the body, and that's when it becomes the dimethyl sulfate. And that's why it becomes vapor.
Mm-hmm. And that may explain, too, why when they were doing the IV, they weren't pulling anything out. It wasn't mixing with the air. It was putting, IV stuff in. So that might account for why the EMTs weren't harmed.
Yeah.
But Gloria's family said that she didn't use DSMO cream. And as a note, about 2/3 of cancer patients have reported using home remedies to try and alleviate symptoms. So I don't know if they'd know every single thing she used, nor am I saying she did it for sure either.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, who could say every single thing a person would try? And like, as a person who trusts science, but understands that science and pharmacology and all of those things are regulated by the government-ish, right? Just because it isn't from the FDA doesn't mean that it's not helpful. It also doesn't mean that you should just go willy-nilly with anything. But my point is just that, like, there's more than one type of way to treat things, and it wouldn't be unreasonable if she tried something else. And also, who the fuck would know if you used a lot of this DMSO cream, this would happen? Likely fucking no one. Because again, remember, people were using this up until the 60s,
right?
And they didn't stop using it because it was causing this problem. They stopped using it because it was causing blindness in mice. And they were like, oh no, this can cause long-term side effects. Not this can cause dangerous vapors to come from your body.
Right. And I want to say, too, it's the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like she could hop on, like an internet group and be like, hey, I have cancer. What are you guys using? It was probably word of mouth at that time. And you can't research as easily as you can today things that people recommend.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the lab sent the results of their experiments to the Riverside coroner to see what they thought. So once they got that information, the coroner's office just full on released it.
Mm-hmm.
And this surprised the lab because they were offering it as an option. They didn't say, like, this is the conclusion. They're like, perhaps this is it, but they, like, ran with it. There were lots of scientists and chemists that disagreed with this possibility because of the amounts needed to cause the reactions in relation to how much DSMO cream would have been used. So it's like, they're like, yeah, that is a thing, but, like, unless she's using a ton of it, we don't see this reaction.
However, from the way that her body was described, it seemed that, like, maybe if she was using it, she had used a lot of it. Like, if there was a sheen all over her body, that would suggest that there might be an abundance on her if she did use it, if it was in the mix.
Right, if she did. Or even, I mean, I don't know the consistency. She could have mixed up some stuff, too. Perhaps she was looking for lotion and she put that on instead. Like, we don't know. It could have been just a whole mix-up. So if you're interested in a more detailed account of how they did the experiments, check out the Discover magazine article by Richard Stone. And it's in our sources, so you'll see it. It's in our show notes. But it is a fascinating read. And it just goes over every little thing. It's very sciencey, though.
Yeah. The only reason that we could explain this science is because we read Richard Stone's article that broke it down. Because it is very intense in science.
Yes. It took me a minute to sit there and go through it because I'm like, okay, I have to look up what this means for a few things. But interesting. Lots of chemistry in there, too, by the way. We also linked to the journal article that Grant, Haas, Whipple, and Andreessen published. So all of it will be in our show notes.
Yeah. An interesting read, but highly suggest. So that was one theory of what happened. There's also a few others. So medical officials have suggested that perhaps Gloria had ingested pesticides, but her family was again very adamant that this didn't happen. Tom Sneath, who heads toxicology at the National Laboratories, noted that over time, pesticides in the body would have degraded. So if she had ingested pesticides on purpose, accidentally, it likely would not have showed up in a toxicology report, and they wouldn't have been able to see it in the samples they had already taken. As an interesting note that further suggests this, in Bakersville, California, medical professionals experienced dizziness and shortness of breath after they inserted a breathing tube into the chest of a woman who they were treating because she had ingested a house insecticide, Dursaban. 19 emergency room workers were examined and treated as a result of their contact with this patient. However, with this situation, all of the emergency personnel, they did not suffer any type of long-term side effects. And the longest anyone was in the hospital as from this was about a week. So it wasn't the same level of severity of the symptoms.
Yeah.
And if we're thinking of home remedies, people try a lot of things when they're scared. I mean, if you even think about like COVID, people were like injecting all sorts of things that should not have been injected as a way of trying to combat a possible illness. And like, obviously a little bit different because we have a horrifying internet these days.
Yeah. And leaders that are telling you to do that. That didn't help.
Yeah, that certainly did not help. But like, all that to say, we don't know if she did or did not, but we also have no judgment if she did because you're trying to help yourself, you know, you just want to be better.
Yeah.
So another theory was that whatever happened to the medical staff at the Riverside Hospital was not from Gloria. It was from the hospital itself. And there's a few reasons why that might be possible. So remember, this happened in February of 1994. In 1993, there were issues with sewer gas coming up into the ER from the drains in the floor. Alarming.
Yeah.
So in 1992, there was algae growing in the hospital's water reservoir. And then in 1991, 2 employees needed medical treatment after a possible hazardous gas leak from sterilizer.
There's a lot going on at this hospital.
There's a lot going on at this hospital. And nonetheless, on February 19th of 1994, a county spokesman, Thomas DeSantis, said that the hospital had been given a clean bill of health. And color me fucking skeptical, because I think it is convenient to scapegoat Gloria in this. And I think that it is no shock at all that official reports omitted the most severe of circumstances. And they were like, oh, you were just scared. All the medical people were just scared. It couldn't possibly be anything having to do with the space.
Exactly. I feel like medical professionals would be one of the hardest group of people to scare.
Yes.
So silly. People are so weird. Okay, so there's also some weirdness after the investigation. The syringe from the ER room that had crystallized blood in it had been discarded.
I just don't believe that.
Right, they would have been like, what the fuck is this?
Also, syringes go into a sharps container which goes into medical waste,
Mhm.
which I'm just going to go ahead and assume isn't changed every 30 minutes, isn't disposed of and destroyed that quickly. So I feel like they could have narrowed down where it could have been and found it if they wanted to.
Yeah, depending on where it happened in the hospital. I know there are usually like protocols on how often or, how busy maybe, but
Yeah.
still interesting.
All that to say is that they may have been like, it is in this massive vat of needles. I'm not saying anybody should go through look at the massive vat of needles, but they would at least know where it was.
Right. And especially this all happened fairly quickly in a night.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't like, a week later we had this. It was like in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
So it disappearing in a matter of hours is strange. If it was, sometime later, totally understand. But hours is a little interesting.
Especially considering they evacuated the emergency room and they only had the people there who were taking care of Gloria. And there's no part of me that's like, you know what? No one's in there. They're trying to save this woman's life, but they're following their like syringe protocols. I don't believe it. And they would have had that syringe as things were happening. So they would have wanted to see what was in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that it only benefits the hospital for that to have gone missing. That's just my little opinion there.
Agreed. And then another just strange thing that happened. Just a month into the investigation, an investigator who was looking into Gloria's case killed himself. We believe it was someone who worked with the coroner's office. Some say that the investigator was facing intense pressure. And I wonder, could you imagine, again, this is all theories here now, if a hospital, who unfortunately a lot of them are for profit, right? And they're going, we need this cleaned up for our shareholders or for whoever makes money with this hospital. We need this cleaned up and we don't need to lose money. Figure it out.
Even if it's not a for-profit hospital, say it's run by the county, the pressure isn't not there, especially when they have 3 years in a row of shitty instances, right? We've got a gas leak from sterilizer. We've got algae. We've got sewer gas coming up. So 4 years in a row is a bad look, not to mention the fact that they already had several lawsuits that were going against them that probably started pretty soon after. So I'm sure there was an intense amount of pressure for this to officially not be the hospital's fault.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, thinking about it too, they're wanting this to go away. They don't want that bad press either way. They don't want to be at fault for anything.
No.
And also, all of the lawsuits that could follow for that too is just a big nightmare that would take forever. So they're just like, get this done. And that's sad if that's the case, why this person killed themselves.
Yeah.
So the most official conclusion is the DMSO cream, but it is not universally accepted. And from what we could see, Gloria's family didn't really believe that she died in any of the ways that the hospital stated. So it's heartbreaking that there doesn't seem to be any reason for why she died. Like there's no conclusive reason that this poor family could be given.
Yeah.
And also, we were intrigued about mass sociogenic illness events generally, so we might do another episode on some of those in the future.
Yeah, and we have talked about them in the past, like with witch trials.
Yeah, but interesting. Interesting.
I think it is such a disservice to everyone involved to just blame it on that, and that there were medical staff who had very real long-term complications from that, and that's heartbreaking. And on top of that, when the conclusion of either DMSO cream or mass sociogenic illness, they both kind of end up with Gloria as the blame, right? Because she is the quote unquote source of this smell.
Right.
When really, we want to know the source. We want to know why things are happening so people can be treated in real time, right? She was just trying to treat herself if she did use the DMSO cream. So it's just heartbreaking all around because there was no answer for anyone. There was no answer for what happened to the medical staff, really how Gloria died, if you're Gloria's family, right? And because if she was in kidney failure, why was she in kidney failure? Cervical cancer doesn't just automatically cause kidney failure. Otherwise, they would have told her it was terminal to begin with.
Right.
So what caused the kidney failure? I think that's kind of at the crux of what's here. And why did she have a heart attack? We don't know. And I don't think that there's ever going to be a real answer for it. And that breaks my heart. This was a really hard case, but it was really interesting to cover. So thank you for the suggestion, Damien. We enjoyed diving into this.
We really did. The other thing that my takeaway that kind of just stresses me out is if she did have that pap smear a few years before and they found possible traces of cancer, And if that really did happen and she wasn't told, that's horrifying. That's so sad for her family. So sad for her, because then if it was caught earlier, perhaps more could have been done.
And I think that's one of the things that's so difficult about uterus owners and cervical owners is that, like, generally they are not taken seriously when there are issues. For example, with myself, I am getting a hysterectomy
Yeah.
because I have a fibroid the size of a peach. Her name is Jolene the Uterine Queen. Yes, she does have a name. But I was experiencing like severe pain. I could barely move pain.
Yeah.
And then another separate pain where whenever I would have it, I would literally almost pass out and I couldn't move because it was always when I was standing and I would be truly unable to move. And I went to my GYN and I explained to her what was going on. And I'd had all the testing to show what was there and to show that this fibroid had gotten bigger. And she looked at me in my eyes and went, "It's not a problem unless it's a problem." And I was like, "It doesn't matter how big it is. It's only if you're experiencing symptoms." And I was like, "These sound like symptoms to me." She was like, "No, that wouldn't cause this." And I trusted her because she was my doctor.
Well, you should be able to.
I should be able to. And when I went to my primary care doctor, she was like, "Maybe you get a second opinion." And when I did, that doctor was like,
Yikes.
"Yeah, the problem is what you think it is, because where it is situated is like literally like right up against my spine. So like, shocker, it causes back pain." And I was like, "Hey, I think it's here." And he's like, "Yeah, that's exactly where it is. Where you're experiencing this horrible pain. Yeah, it's because of the thing that's inside of you. Of course it is." And it was like, fuck, man, like, why would she lie? And he's like, "Maybe she doesn't deal with those surgeries. So like, she doesn't have to."
But refer, like, hey, there's something strange. I would refer you to this. It's just some of it too, unfortunately, I don't know about your case, obviously, but like some of it is also due to insurance stuff lately with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're afraid to bring it up because they're like, fuck, like if I do, they're going to have them do this, which a lot of the times it's things that won't even help, but they have to go through A, B, C, and D before they can actually do something real.
Yeah.
It's just a fucking shit show here.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. But like, my point here wasn't to be like, "Well, me." It was more like when you go to doctors, they aren't always like, "Hey, here's the problem. We can work on this."
Or they're afraid to.
They're like, "Oh, it's not a problem yet." And I'm like, "I feel like this is a problem if it's impacting my daily life."
Nah, you're hysterical.
You know, I'm but a woman, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Ugh.
whole uterus is gonna go. I don't know. I didn't know what to say. I got weird. I got awkward. I don't know.
I just think of when you're like, can I have it in a jar?
Oh, yeah, I did ask my doctor if I could have it, and he looked at me how you imagine he did and was like, "No." And one of our
weirdo.
Patreons, Lexi, she works in the medical field. She does testing, from my understanding. And I was like, "Hey, is there any way I can request this?" And she like lovingly gave me like such an explanation of like, they're going to chop it up and do testing on different pieces and make sure that there's nothing cancerous or anything else scary. So like, it's not as though they're just going to have the whole organ to give back to you. She's like, "You could probably request it after that, but like," and I was like, "No, that feels just like a pile of meat." Do you know what I mean at that point?
I love that she wasn't phased, though.
No, yeah, she was completely unfazed. She was like, "Oh," like the way that like she couched it was like you could, but it's just not going to be a whole uterus.
Perfect. Love it.
What a time.
Well, speaking of Patreon, she was just talking about one of the conversations we had during her Patreon night. It got weird. It was hilarious, though.
It always does.
It always does. But we had a great time. So if you are interested in our Patreon, head to our website. We have tiers that start at just $1. We're also still doing stickers for reviews, and we've gotten a few lately. So thank you to those that have reviewed, taken the time to do that, because I know you have to take time out of your day to do that for us. So we really, really do appreciate it. And if you did do one, send us a screenshot and we'd be happy to send you a sticker. I just did one yesterday. And as Lindsay said earlier, this was a recommendation and also just a weird rabbit hole that we went down on top of it. But if you do have any recommendations, send them our way. We do have a list, and we are actually researching several of them at the same time. Some of them just take a little bit longer.
Yes.
But we do write them down. We do have them in a big list. We will try to get to all of them throughout the course of True Creeps.
I would also point out, too, can you send us episode ideas of things that are solved? Yes. But do you have a question? Are you wondering about something? We could wonder with you. We could research some weird shit. If you're like,
oh, yeah,
I'm confused at why this happens in the world, we're your gals.
Let's do a friendly conversation about it.
Yeah. Let's find out.
Yeah. So lastly, just to add, Lindsay and I just a few days ago got back from St. Augustine. It was a great trip. I had so much fun hanging out with everyone. We are currently sifting through all of the various types of footage that we have through the 3 investigations that we did.
So much footage, so much content.
So much. I uploaded it and I was like, Lindsay, I just uploaded like 20 gigs of stuff.
Oh, you haven't even done the voice recorder stuff yet, have you?
Nope. So we have a lot to sift through. It's going to take us some time, but once we are ready with all of the things that we found, we will be sharing it with everyone, and we cannot wait.
We are very excited, which is why you'll probably see some stuff on social media before then when we'll share clips and stuff as like little teasers of some stuff, but definitely not everything.
Yes.
So just if you don't follow us, you might want to if you are intrigued about some paranormal activity-ish things.
Lots of paranormal activity was had.
Indeed. Indeed it was.
So, yeah, we're very excited to share it with you. We're just going through it. We actually, we took like an hour and a half, 2 hours before we recorded today, just going through some of it because we were excited to show each other things that we saw.
Yes.
Cannot wait, though. But with all of that, hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks for creeping with us. Thanks for listening. And as always, a special thank you to our patrons who support us via Patreon.
Please see the link in our show notes to learn more about how you, yes you, can begin to haunt the dump, guard vortexes, or even become a scorching Sasquatch.
Ooh. Also in our show notes, you can find the link to our website, more information on our sources, our social media handles, and our merch store.
We'd love for you to keep creeping with us. So if you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the show with your fellow creeps and or ghosts.
I beg of you. I know, I'm moving all around. I know, I'm just banging and clanging, you know me. Welcome to True Creeps. We've got a podcast, but we're not good at talking.
Free audio post-production.